Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, cut off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
What you know, good, Ann Camp? You're listening to the Ann Campaign's Church Politics Podcast with Justin Gibney, a.k.a. Bishop Cooper's grandson. Now, I know I took a week off or so, and, I hate to leave y'all without an episode for some time, but I assure you that it was for a good cause. Went on vacation with my family, and so I'm hoping I'm going to be even more clear and concise now that I got a little bit of rest. But speaking of Bishop Cooper, my grandfather, I come with good news. I want to share a little bit of good news today. All the way from Decatur, Illinois, I have an uncle who is a councilman down there, and he let me know that my grandfather would be receiving an honorary street designation on the street right in front of the church. The church, as you know, is Church of Living God, PGT Nation, Temple Number 2. And it's just an honor to hear. I mean, my grandfather, one of the reasons that he's such an inspiration to me is the time and sacrifice he put into the community and the time and sacrifice he put into the church. And it's always good to hear that somebody is getting acknowledgement for something like that. So excited to hear that. Wanted to share that news with you, especially for those of you who know how important my grandfather and his legacy are to me. So that's one thing. But you also know we like to start these episodes with a little bit of a sports conversation every now and then. And unless you've been under a rock, you saw or you at least heard about the back and forth between LeBron James and Stephen A. Smith. So apparently, I don't know, was it before the game, during the game, after the game? LeBron James went up and in person on the court confronted Stephen A. Smith. Apparently, he had an issue with how Stephen A. Smith was talking about Bronny James. Now, before I get into this, I think it's only fair for me to give a little bit of context and a little bit of background. I have always been a Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant guy. Okay, that's the perspective that I'm coming from. I have great respect for LeBron James and that he is one of the top 5 players ever. I respect his longevity, and I respect how he's conducted himself as a man and as a father. I think he has been a good role model in that regard, okay? But at the same time, I don't think his approach to the game is the same type of approach as you saw from Jordan and Kobe. And I think in some instances, his approach to the game has hurt the NBA. That's just my point of view, all right? And this is kind of what I mean, right? So we all know how Bronny James got to where he is. I don't think he's at fault at all for that. And I actually feel bad for the kid that he has to be in the middle of this. But he got there by way of his dad's position. And my problem with LeBron James is you put your son in this position and you know that this is a sport and this is partially entertainment, but you don't want to take the other side of what comes with that. And just like when I talk about politics, I tell people, hey, man, don't get in politics. Don't get on the field if you don't want to get hit. You will be critiqued. You will be criticized. And that doesn't mean all that criticism and critique is fair, but you know the game that you got into. And you kind of have to accept that. So to lash out against people who are really just doing their job, I don't agree with everything that Stephen A. Smith says, but I didn't hear anything that he said that was just completely out of line. In fact, that wasn't true, right? So they'll have that back and forth. I'm sure at some point they'll both get over it. You heard that Stephen A. Smith just got a pretty big deal. And so they'll, in one way or another, have to engage each other for a while here on out. But just an interesting back and forth. And from my perspective, I think LeBron went about it in the wrong way. Now, do I understand a father defending his son? Sure. but the context matters, and how he got put in that position and who put him in that position matter as well. All right. Now, as always, I got to give a shout to our patrons and supporters for supporting us in what we do and how we do it. Greatly appreciate you guys. There are not a lot of podcasts and not a lot of organizations that talk about politics with the depth that we talk about them, and are not coming from a conservative or progressive point of view. And when we travel and just hear all the people that support us because of that perspective, we greatly appreciate you. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more of this, if you want to be able to ask me questions, you can go to patreon.com/churchpolitics. And if you become a patron, that means someone who gives monthly, you won't only get this episode, but you'll get an extra segment. So for instance, after I record right now, I'm going to go to the Patreon and I'm going to record another segment on Christians supporting Andrew Tate and what I think about that. So if you want to hear what I have to say about Andrew Tate and the Christians that support him, make sure you become a patron. But either way, we appreciate y'all. Keep spreading the word, because that's really how the AND campaign gets exposure. You know, we don't have no huge marketing budget, but we do have those of you who shout us out and who let people in your church and around you know, and at your school and all those other things know what we're doing here on this podcast and just with the organization in general. All right. But there's so much to talk about. You know, I don't want to delay it any further. Let's get into it. So grab your Bibles, get your mind right, and prepare to think, not like a Republican, not like a Democrat, but to think like a Christian. And to think like a Christian, you have to be in Scripture and you have to know Scripture. So let's start with some Scripture. I want to start in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7, which says, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. I have fought the good fight. I have kept the faith. This is Apostle Paul, obviously talking to Timothy. And I think what I gather from this is that Apostle Paul is saying that he fought the good fight by preaching and reflecting the gospel. Here, the word fight means to strive against, to contend. The good fight, from what I gather, is an effort that obeys and glorifies God. In order for us to fight the good fight, we must not only have a righteous objective, but righteous methods and a righteous mode of operation. Now, the reason that I bring this up is because I think that when we lose a political election or when we lose in some other arena of life, we often have this sense of helplessness. This sense of insecurity. We feel that we're outnumbered and that we're under attack, and sometimes we're right. But in this helplessness, I think we begin to feel like everything is moving in the opposite direction. We begin to feel like we have no control over the important outcomes that are affecting our lives, and that we're kind of at the mercy of forces that are working counter to our best interest or counter to the interest of people that we care about. And in these moments, when we feel this way, it really does feel good to know that someone is fighting for you, that someone is standing up to the bad guy on your behalf, that somebody, even in these circumstances, somebody is showing courage and somebody is refusing to bow, to bend the knee, right? That seems to be our remedy to this sort of helplessness. No one wants to take a beating sitting down. And so we appreciate those who continue to fight even after we've taken an L or we're continually taking an L. And I'll tell you this, man, just to be straight up, as an Orthodox Black man, I have felt that way when racism was beating my people down and we saw all this racialized, injustice and this racialized violence. I've also felt that way when secular progressivism was maliciously running roughshod over religious convictions. And so in a real way, I sympathize with, I understand that response. And the reason that I bring it up is because recently I was having a conversation with some folks about some of the bad behavior coming from Democrats as a response to the administration's bad behavior. And I think I made a pretty strong point about why that behavior was not helpful from either side, right? Like the initial action and the response to that action, or the response to that behavior, they were both unhelpful. And after I made the point, one of the people that I was talking to said, well, at least they're fighting, right? At least they're trying. I think the idea behind that is that any fight is better than surrender. Any fight is better than a sort of paralysis where you're not doing anything. It doesn't really matter what you say or how you say it. At least register our disapproval. At least make our protest known. At least display our resistance so other people hear it. I mean, other people hear it and see it. Give us a voice, any voice. And that seems to be where a lot of Democrats are today. They're basically saying that we've got to do something, anything, and honestly, the more pointed or piercing that it is, the better. And so the first thing I want to do right now is affirm that you shouldn't lay down and surrender in these moments. To fight the good fight and to keep the faith when you're under attack, when things seem bleak, when a lot of people seem to be giving up, is virtuous. To keep going, to not be discouraged in those moments is virtuous, right? To encourage people and protect people in those moments is a good thing. But I also want to say, you've got to be fighting the good fight, though. That's operative here. And what I mean by that is your methods, your attitudes, and your words matter. In other words, significant aspects of Trump's agenda should be resisted. But everyone who opposes him shouldn't be assumed to be helpful or effective. So, for instance, if he says words that degrade people on the left, and then you choose a champion that comes back with words that degrade people on the right, then nothing profitable has been accomplished. You haven't really achieved anything. And in fact, you could have actually made things worse. Your fight, your resistance can be effective, or it can be counterproductive. It can be prophetic, or it can be short-sighted. It can be redemptive and make things better, or it can be destructive and make things worse. If we resort to the worst impulses and we get behind the most vile and vitriolic representatives just because they're fighting, then we're not fighting the good fight. And it's something that I address in my new book, and I hope y'all all take a moment to go to Amazon and to pre-order the book, which is Don't Let Nobody Turn You Around. And in the book, I talk about this concept that I call empty defiance. Empty defiance is a fight where the opponent might be very wrong, but our response is disconnected from any virtue. Empty defiance is a fight where simply offending or humiliating your opponents seems like enough. But the truth is, it's nothing. It's actually worse than nothing. It's counterproductive. When we just fight in counterproductive ways, it hurts us. It hurts us, and sometimes more than it actually hurts them, and it can set you back. When we just fight, again, in unproductive ways, one of the ways that it hurts us is you lose credibility. You lose the persuadable person. They stop listening to you. We lose not only credibility, but we lose social capital and political capital. When we fight the bad fight, and this may be the worst part of it, we tarnish our public witness. And your public witness doesn't belong to you. If you're a Christian, your public witness belongs to God. So you have to be very careful about who you get behind. Because what ends up happening when we enter into this kind of empty defiance, just being defiant for its own sake, we end up encouraging bad behavior, really bad behavior, and the discourse and the conversation gets worse, and we get further away from the solutions that the hurting people need to have. And this is what I want to tell you about encouraging politicians' bad behavior. Politicians are like children in this way. When they get attention for certain behavior, they will keep doing whatever it was that they got attention for. And this is exactly why I've been on record, and I will continue to say it, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear it, but I will continue to say that politicians like Nancy Mace, like Matt Gaetz, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, like Jasmine Crockett, should not be applauded. They should be corrected. And I don't know any of them, so it's not personal, but they should be corrected. And people don't like to hear that. People get upset. But I think if we're honest, if we don't just support them because they're in our identity group or they're in our party or I'm supporting them just because they're defending my side, then I think we can honestly step back and say that behavior is not helpful in general. And I've committed to saying that regardless of what party somebody's in, regardless of what race somebody's in, if the behavior is not helpful, we have to say that again, or else we lose credibility. If I'm a Christian and I'm willing to defend everything Nancy Mace does, then the persuadable, good faith person who's listening to me is probably going to stop listening to me because they can see that behavior should not be encouraged. If I'm a Christian and I am determined to defend everything Jasmine Crockett does, then the persuadable person that I'm going to need to persuade to get things done and get to solutions is going to stop listening to me because I'm no longer an honest broker. So in our effort to avoid surrendering and in our effort to avoid feeling helpless, when we embrace representatives just because they're talking loud and they're fighting against the other side, we have to understand that we're not necessarily fighting the good fight. And let me say this to be clear one more time, because we know that people sometimes like to misunderstand you and go out of their way to misunderstand you. I'm not telling you not to fight back. You've never heard me say that. I'm saying that you should be aspirational and sober and strategic and redemptive when you fight back, or your efforts are counterproductive. Or the people you say you're trying to help, you're not actually helping them. You just want to vent. You just want somebody that can hopefully make the other side feel some of the pain that you are feeling. And that is not effective. That does nothing for you at the end of the day. It's short-sighted because temper tantrums in the public square really do nothing for us. All right. Now, in conclusion, I'm going to say this too. There's a line that partisans never failing, always use after they lost or when they're losing. Always. And people who know politics are going to recognize this saying. And the people who repeat whatever partisans say, they say this all the time too. When a party loses or a partisan loses, they say, we lost because we don't fight as hard as they do. We lost because we're not as mean and as nasty as they are. And I think, I hear it all the time. I hear it from both sides, and I think it's extremely silly. If this is what you need to hear, I'll assure you of this. I assure you that there are people on your side, that there are people in your identity group, that there are people in your tribe who are sufficiently underhanded, who are sufficiently mean, nasty, and who are willing to do anything to win. You did not lose because you don't have people on your team who aren't willing to do anything to win. I promise you, they're there. but that's not the issue. And if you have to be the meaner or nastier and a nastier one, a more opportunistic to win, that's not a win that you really want, because that's not a redemptive win. And you might just have to go through trying to do it the right way. But that's where moral imagination comes in. Is it worth doing the right thing, even if I end up losing? But I want to tell y'all, most of the time when parties lose, it's not because they're not mean enough. It's not because they're not nasty enough. They're plenty nasty, and there are plenty of people on both sides who will do whatever they have to do to win. All right. Last thought. Let me put it that way. For Democrats who are feeling this way, who are feeling like, man, we need to fight. Where is the fight? I just want somebody to fight. I want you to keep in mind that, right or wrong, this is exactly how a lot of people who are now in MAGA felt before Trump came along. And I want you to recognize where that type of desperation and where that conclusion put their public witness. You can think they were wrong for feeling that way, but it's that feeling that made them accept leadership, the leadership that they've accepted and got behind, because they were fighting for them at a moment when they felt like their backs were against the wall. Is that enough? I'll be right back on the Church Politics Podcast.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
Now, speaking of fighting, I think it's fair to say that the Democrats are flailing. Some of them are trying to fight, but it seems like they can't find the right ground to fight on, the right message, or the right messengers. And so, especially within the last couple of weeks, we've seen them make attempts at fighting, attempts at countering, the administration's message, that have, to be kind, have just not been effective. To be honest, have just been kind of embarrassing. So I want you to take a quick look at one of the videos that they put together to show that they were ready to fight. Yeah, that's pretty bad. I don't know who's putting together these videos. I don't know about who's behind this strategy, but it needs to change. And to be honest, when you've lost your footing, it can be very hard to find your way back, right? What people have to understand is the loss that Democrats just took was devastating, and really, it's going to take a while for people to recover, right? So to expect them just to rebound with the perfect message probably isn't going to happen immediately. But some people are seeing some signs of a light coming from another place, all right? And that other place is Senator Bernard Sanders, aka Bernie Sanders. Many of you know that Bernie Sanders is the independent senator from Vermont. He's the leader of the populist left. And one thing I'll say about Bernie Sanders is I've always thought that Bernie Sanders was a very sincere politician. Haven't always agreed with him, that's for sure. But I think he believes what he says. And that says a lot. I mean, when you're talking about the Ted Cruzes and the Gavin Newsoms who will say or do anything, put their finger in the wind and say or do anything they think will get them ahead, it's good to see somebody who seems to actually care about principles and the issues that they're talking about. And right or wrong, agree or disagree, I've always seen Senator Bernie Sanders as that type of person. Now, you heard me just say that he is the leader of the populist left. And I don't want to assume that you know what populism is, okay? But the populist perspective basically says, and this is very general, but it basically says that the people need to be protected from the elite. So you have the people and you have the elite. Trump got in office to some extent based on kind of becoming the leader of the populist right. How populist he really is a question. I think JD Vance is probably more of a pure populist, to be honest. But that's kind of how he got in. Now, for me, in this moment, in this context, I do think the people in general do need to be represented better, and that the elites have taken advantage of the people. Okay. However, I don't consider myself a populist because I don't put whole groups of people in good and bad categories. So whereas a populist might say the people are good and the elites are corrupt or the elites are bad, I can't say it's that simple. The people are good. So people who aren't elite, people who aren't in the establishment are automatically good. No, not necessarily. And at the same time, while I think the elites have done some terrible things and they have broken a lot of institutions and lost a lot of the public's trust, I can't say that just because you are a leader, just because you have a certain amount of money, you're automatically bad. Right. So that's where I kind of break from. It's too ideological for me. That's kind of where I break from that. Although I do believe that in this moment, there needs to be a shift of power back to the people to some extent, because the elites in the places where they were trusted, they have violated the public trust in a lot of ways. And some of that needs to be corrected. Does that mean that Trump is correcting it in the right way? No. But it does mean some of that needs to be corrected. And so I think we are very much in a populist moment for that. There's a reason why people don't trust institutions. It's not just because they're conspiracy theorists. Yes, they may go too far with that stuff, but there's a reason why they don't trust elites and institutions in this moment. So it's a populist moment for a reason, and I think that's because of the failures of the elite establishment. Doesn't mean the elite establishment is purely evil and the people are purely good. No. But in this moment, I think something does need to change. Now, the issue that Democrats are having is that they too are run by the establishment. And so I'm just going to be straight up with you. The people who actually lead the Democratic apparatus cannot lead a populist movement. And I think it's going to take a movement that challenges the elite to challenge Trump, right? The left's going to have the left's going to have their own elite challenging message, and it's going to have to be sincere to really challenge what's going on the right now. And the problem is, though, again, the people who run the Democratic Party can't pull that off. So, for instance, just like Nancy Pelosi can't pull off a populist message because, number one, all the money that she makes from being in office and how tied she is into Wall Street and things of that nature. Same thing for Hakeem Jeffries. I know people don't want to hear it, but I don't care what your identity is. It's very clear that he's very tied in with Wall Street. You cannot be that tied in with Wall Street and be the messenger for the message that they need right now. I think that's kind of where they're struggling, because you can talk about oligarchy, but if I look back and all the policies you supported when it comes to economics have helped people in those positions, then it's just not going to come off well. Bernie Sanders has the ability to do that. I'll talk about whether or not he can be the future of that, but I want to talk about kind of what he's been doing lately, because Bernie, because of his populist stance, and I think because of his sincerity, is becoming the most effective face of the anti-Trump resistance. And that's how it was that's how it was kind of laid out in Time magazine recently. So he's been on this Stop the Oligarchy tour. And if you don't know what oligarchy is, go a few episodes back where I explain it in detail. But here's what Time Magazine had to say about this tour that he's on. It says that he's facing several hundred ecstatic voters huddled outside a suburban Detroit high school. This was in Warren, Michigan, I believe. The group did not fit into the high school gym or 2 overflow rooms. The crowd screams in delight when he tells them that a combined total of 9,000 people had shown up to the rally. That's a big number. That is something that's countering some of these large rallies that Trump was having. What all this tells me, he says, is not just in Michigan or in Vermont, the people of this country will not allow us to move toward oligarchy. They will not allow Trump to take us into authoritarianism, Sanders said. We're prepared to fight, and we're going to win. It goes on to say that the 83-year-old Sanders is not running for president again, but the stoop and the silver-haired Democratic socialist has emerged as a leader of the resistance to Donald Trump's second presidency. In tearing into Trump's seizure of power and warning about the consequences of firing tens of thousands of government workers, Sanders is bucking the wishes of those who want the Democratic Party to focus on the price of eggs or to roll over and play dead. Interesting. So he's bringing a different message. And I mean, 9,000 people in Michigan is a big deal. And guess what? We know from the last election that Democrats need Michigan. Now, again, like I said, I've always thought that Bernie Sanders was sincere. I haven't agreed with many of the policies that he's pushed, right? Like, so while I do think government has a serious and significant role to play in the flourishing of Americans, I don't, the whole idea of giving people all this stuff for free, it sounds good and I wish it would work. History tells me that doesn't work. All right, it just doesn't work. You will waste a lot, and it doesn't even help the people in many instances. If you go overboard, it doesn't help the people that you're intending to help. I also don't know, I'm not convinced that handing all healthcare to government, I think it should be accessible to everybody, and I think there should be options. There should be the government option, but I'm not convinced that everybody would want the government running their healthcare, and that would be done efficiently in a good way. That's just me. All right, but again, we are in this populist moment, and I think there's a message there that Democrats could grab onto and have some success, at least do better than they're doing right now. All right. The question is, though, look, Bernie's 83 years old, right? Yes, he's the leader of this resistance right now, but I do think he needs to pass the torch to a younger populist who comes off as sincerely as he does. Who that is, I'm not sure. That's kind of the problem that they have. But here's the problem with leftward populism. A lot of people who are populist, the people, middle America and folks like that, cannot get with the far left agenda on culture issues. And one of the things that Bernie did when he ended up running for president is he ended up adopting a lot of those issues that he wasn't so hardcore on before. All right. And when I listen to a lot of populists, whether they're talking heads or whatever, there's such a huge disconnect between what they say in regard to economics and how they connect with the people on that, and what they say in regard to cultural issues. It's very clear that a lot of these people, are in elite circles, or at least came out of elite circles. And while they may have changed their economics, they still kind of grabbed onto the very far left cultural issues, which is going to be an issue for them as they try to reach your average person, because a lot of them just will not moderate on those issues, because many of those issues, as I said before, have sort of become articles of faith. But we'll have to see what happens. I'll be right back on the Church Politics Podcast. And we're back on the Church Politics Podcast. Some of you may have heard this name before. Ben Shapiro is a conservative political commentator. He's an attorney and I believe he's the founder of the Daily Wire, which is a media group that, at one time had Candace Owens on there, and him and Candace have since gotten into it or whatever, but very conservative point of view. I've talked about him on the show before, but I'm not a fan of Ben Shapiro. I think that he is bigoted. I think he tries to rile up conservatives and kind of gets at their worst impulses, right? And I just don't appreciate it. And what I'm going to bring up now is kind of an example of exactly what I'm talking about. So according to CNN, Ben Shapiro has publicly called for President Trump to pardon former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin for the federal crimes related to George Floyd's 2020 death. Obviously, this drew derision from the Minnesota Attorney General, who had helped put Chauvin in prison. But it was kind of amplified. The article was talking about how it was amplified by some voices who are very close to Trump. So after Ben Shapiro said this, Elon Musk, I think it was, weighed in and said that's something that Trump should consider. Before I get into this, I'll say that Trump was asked about it, and Trump said that he's not considering it. But the fact that it was brought up, the motive behind bringing it up needs to be questioned. Because in so many cases, you hear commentators and folks on the right talk about race baiters, right? They're always talking about this person's a race baiter. Every time somebody brings up something about race, they are a race baiter. And I'll be honest with you, there are race baiters out there. There are people who have created an industry out of bringing up race, and they use those issues to build their platform. It happens. It happens on every issue. But everybody who brings up race on legitimate issues, especially when it comes to George Floyd, is not a race baiter. And everybody who talks about race is not a race baiter. There are legitimate issues that we're dealing with in this country, and some people choose not to see it. But if there are truly race baiters in our society right now, then Ben Shapiro has to be the opposite of a race baiter, or is he just a race baiter himself? The only way that you reach back to 2020 and pull Derek Chauvin out of here and start bringing up stuff like this is to draw attention to yourself. It's because you think it's provocative, right? No matter how disgusting or nasty this suggestion is, it's going to bring him some attention. And people who just want to see people fighting for them, as I was talking about earlier, people who just want to own the libs are going to be excited about this statement. And I would ask Christians, if we support people who say things like this, because this is my thing about him. I'm going to judge everybody by the merits of their argument, but I'm also going to put into context the things that you have said before. And based on the things that he has said before regarding race, and based on how he has too many times been far more provocative than credible, this is just somebody that has no credibility with me. And this is somebody who is not about solutions. So I'll have conversations with almost anybody, but when somebody is not a good faith broker, when somebody is not at all trying to be constructive, then at some point you say, this conversation is not hopeful to anybody. It's not going to go anywhere. And so I would ask y'all not to spend too much time. For those of you on the right, I would ask you to shut some of this stuff down, right? To speak out against why suggestions because not only didn't stop there. Here's the thing. He didn't stop at just suggesting that Derek Chauvin should be pardoned. He also, I'm hearing, started a petition to Governor Kemp here in Georgia, saying that he should release the people charged with the people who were prosecuted for shooting Ahmaud Arbery. So he just didn't bring up one of the most controversial things that happened when it comes to race relations in America. He brought up two of them and took the same provocative stance. And so for any Christian that's supporting that, you know, I have to question your discernment. I have to question your discernment. Now, again, before we go too far with this, Trump said, and he could change his mind, but Trump said that he's not considering it. I'm almost certain that Governor Kemp is not considering pardoning the folks that here in Georgia that killed Ahmaud Arbery. So that is good. So for the people who just want to say that everything is, you know, that everything is going crazy and you're about to be back in slavery and all that, well, maybe this is a good sign, but we still have people like Ben Shapiro who are willing to exploit issues like this for their own platform. I think that's a problem. All right, Ann Camp, I enjoyed today's episode. I hope you did too. You know what it is. There's a cross that neither political conservatism nor progressivism is fit to bear. There's a civic hearing in need of faithful witnesses who love social justice and won't surrender the truth to be loved by the world. Politic with the boldness and compassion of Jesus Christ. Until next time, Ann Camp, I'll holler at you.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up, but with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.